Welcome back to Pemberley Farm. This is the second in our series on open fire cooking, and today we're going to talk about the tools that you need for open fire cooking. Now granted, you don't have to have everything I'm going to show you today, but they are things that make your life a little bit easier when you're doing open fire cooking, and they can be very helpful. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And our backdrop is a big enclosed trailer that we have, and all of our camping equipment, all of our cast iron equipment, we do living histories from the 1850s and 60s. All of that equipment is in this big trailer that I'm standing in front of, and so that's why we're filming here, is because everything was in here. So let me just say too that we've been working in the yard all morning, and so that's why I still have on a hat and I'm dressed like I am. These are work clothes. This is real life. So this is what you get when you're on a farm and you have a lot of work to do. So anyway, so we're talking about essential tools. And again, the right tools for anything make those jobs easier. Since we're talking about open fire cooking, that we're dealing with fire, the very first thing I want to talk about is the gloves. These leather gloves, they are welder's gloves. And they're very important because everything you're going to handle is going to be very hot, and you don't want to burn yourself. That would just ruin your day. They need to be very big on you so that you can shake them off real quick if they get too hot. And even though I have small hands, these still shake off of my husband's hand very easy too. You can see they've been well used, and they cover your wrist and on up your arm. And so they're very important. You can get these at Harbor Freight and places like that, maybe hardware stores somewhere, I don't know. But anyway, these are important to have if you do very much open fire cooking at all. That way you don't get burned. Something else that is very helpful if you do very much open fire cooking is a lid lifter. Now, this lid lifter, you see, has got a long crossbar here, and this part has a hook to it. And how this is used is like this. See, the crossbar keeps it from wobbling, and the hook holds on to your lid, and it keeps it from, we have one that this part is straight and it doesn't hold it very well, and you don't want your ashes dumping into your food. So that's what this lid lifter's for, and they make your life so much easier. And they're probably around $15 in places like Lehman's and other hardware stores. I've seen them in hardware stores, the old-fashioned kind of hardware stores that still got the good stuff. So they're around $15 to $20, and they'll last a lifetime. We've had this one for years and years. So the next thing you're going to need, that would be helpful, I say you're going to need, it's something that would be helpful, especially if you're going to cook meat and you don't want it directly on, like a roast or something, and you don't want it directly on the bottom of the pan. Or if you are baking something in another pan and you don't want it directly on the bottom of the Dutch oven, is a trivet. This is a trivet, and it goes inside the pan. It goes inside the pan, and it keeps whatever you've put on it from touching the very bottom of the pan, because it gets hotter on the very bottom of the pan. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Another thing that's very handy, and that we didn't have when we first started, is a lid stand. But if this is a lid stand, okay? Now, if you have you need to stir, you need to check on it, and you need to stir it, or you need to add something to it. What are you going to do? Where are you going to put your lid? You don't want to put the inside of your lid over on the dirt. So what you need is the lid stand, and it holds your lid and keeps your lid clean. The underside of your lid, it keeps it clean. Now you'll see some of these pieces like this one. This one hadn't been used in years and years. Some of these, the trailer sprung a leak that we didn't know about, and it got some of our cast iron, and it rusted it. So we've got to do a lot of work on some of our cast iron because it is it's a shame. But anyway, that it got rained on. This one, like I say, though, hadn't been used in many years. We just haven't had we have not had the need for one this small, but it fit on the table well, and so we used this one to demonstrate. All right, so another thing that you're going to need is a shovel with a long handle. Well, why do I need a shovel? Well, because remember, if you'll remember from when we talked about fire, you're not cooking with big flaming fire. You're cooking with coals, and you have to pull your coals out of the fire away from the fire a little bit, sit your oven or whatever, your Dutch oven, this is a camp oven, we'll talk about the differences in a minute, on top of your coals, and then you're also going to need to put some on top. So you need a small shovel. Now you can use a big shovel, but this just makes life much easier. We used a big shovel for years. But this just makes life so much easier, and we keep it in this trailer, and this is all this is used for. And it's got a long enough handle that if your fire was getting pretty big, you still could reach in and get coals and not get burned. All right, so the other thing you're going to need are cooking utensils with long handles. Now, ideally, you would want longer handles than this even, and we do have some, and I will admit and apologize that we have longer handled utensils, but they're buried in the bottom of this trailer, and if you saw inside the trailer, you would understand that we just didn't have it in us to dig to the bottom today. So anyway, but you understand, long handled like this, or even longer would be better. And so long handled utensils so that you can stir without getting too hot. Now there are a lot of people I know that do not allow metal in their cast iron. And so if you have long wooden spoons, as long as you're careful using it, you can do that. For sure you don't want to use plastic in it. But then there are people who say that, they're not a purist at all and a metal spoon is fine. So whatever you choose, however you feel about your cast iron. There are pieces that my husband won't even allow anything with a tomato in it inside. So, to each his own on this. All right, so now you can get by without most all of this, but again, it would make your life easier to have these things, especially the gloves and the lid lifter. Those are really important if you do this for very, very much at all. But you can collect these few items over time. It doesn't take very long to collect some of this stuff. You might find it used somewhere or at a hardware store. But it makes your life a lot easier if you have at least these things. Now, you can stay simple like that, or you can go all out. This is our full setup. I can't think that we have something somewhere else so we didn't dig out. But this is our full setup. And yes, this is a lot of stuff, but we've collected it over the years. We did not go into it all at one time. And you'll see that there's a lot of cast iron here and a lot of equipment. We have the tripod with a Dutch oven hanging on it. That's not a camp oven, and we'll get into the differences between that in a few minutes. We have our grate here that's got our skillet on it, and even our old waffle iron. The grate we had made by a blacksmith that we do a lot of living histories with. And so if you like this setup or something similar to this, and you know of a blacksmith or can find a blacksmith in your town, then he can make you something like this. It's very straightforward and very simple. Now, you'll see also that we've added our stack of Dutch ovens here. And actually, you can cook with them stacked like this. You would have coals on the bottom and coals on each lid, which in turn would be coals on the bottom of the one above it. And you can cook with it stacked just like this, or you can just cook with one out onto the coals on the ground. So the bottom one is a 14. The next one up is a 12 deep, and the top one is a 12 regular. And this is the one that my husband calls baby. You can see it's been used a lot. This is our bread Dutch oven. And there's nothing allowed in this Dutch oven except cornbread or biscuits, because he calls it his cast iron Teflon, because it is seasoned really well, and we never have a problem with anything sticking in it. But that's because nothing but bread goes in it. So there's a lot of things you can get that are cast iron. The little muffin pans or the loaf pan, just it depends on what you are interested in. I think Ashley already showed you the pie pan, and there's fryers and griddles and things like that. So there's a lot of things you can do, and you don't have to have all this stuff. But like I say, because we do the living histories, we have more probably than most people. But it's a lot of fun, and we enjoy it. And hey, if we ever couldn't use our gas, if there was no more gas to be had or there was no power, we have a complete setup here that we can cook anything that you cook in your home in an oven or on a stove. These Dutch ovens work just like an oven in your house, with only just a tiny bit more effort to it. So anyway, so let's go on now, and what we're going to talk about are the Dutch ovens themselves. The Dutch oven that is hanging on the tripod is just a regular Dutch oven. You could use that in your house on top of your stove or in your oven. It is just a regular Dutch oven. And I might say that for the most part, all our equipment is Lodge, except the Big 14. It's another company, but we like Lodge cast iron. We use it, and when we buy new, that's what we buy is Lodge. But anyway, so let's talk about Dutch ovens. That's a regular Dutch oven that she just showed you on the tripod. And then we have what we call a camp oven. Well, it's called a camp oven because you use it when you're camping or if you're cooking outside, and you want to be able to put coals under the pan without the flat bottom of the pan sitting directly on the coals, because it'll burn what you've got in there, especially if you're doing bread. So these little legs keep it up directly off the fire, but the heat from the fire is still there, or off the coals, I should say. Also, a camp oven, you'll notice, has the lip on the lid, and that's so that when you put your coals on top, that it is not going, they're not going to fall off. So if you pick your lid up to see what your cooking is doing on the inside, you're not going to have ashes fall off into your food, which is a bad thing. That ruins your day when you've got a nice pot of food there and the ashes fall off into it. So anyway, so when we're choosing a Dutch oven, what should we look for? Now remember, I told you I have notes because I'm old and I forget things. So I've still got notes, and y'all just have to bear with me on that. All right. So make sure, first of all, that the lid fits well. I mean, the whole point of a Dutch oven is that you have a lid and that the lid fits well, because if it doesn't fit well, then it's not an oven. It's going to leak, and it's going to leak the heat as well as the moisture, and you just have a mess. So make sure that your lid fits well. Also check the sides and the bottom of the lid to make sure that everything looks good. And your pan or your oven itself, make sure that the sides and the bottom are all equally the same size. So for instance, if this was how wide the top edge of it was, but later on it kind of thinned out, that's a bad thing, because this is going to burn when this won't. So the thinner the metal, the more chance you have of burning if there's an area on your pan that is thin. So you want to check it over really well. Now, Lodge does a really good job of checking their stuff. They don't let out stuff that's not in good shape, but still, you never know. And if you buy one at an antique store or from somebody's yard sale or somewhere else, then you don't know necessarily what you're getting. So you need to make sure that you want even heat distribution. So you need to make sure of that. All right, the inside should be flat, just like we showed you in baby. The inside should be flat. Okay. and somewhat smooth. Now, this, I wished I had brought one that I have in the house that I only use in the house, because it is very slick, but it's probably close to 100 years old. And it has only been used to cook cornbread and biscuits in for nearly 100 years. And so it is just as slick as it can be on the bottom. Where these are, even though these are old pans, they're not that old. And so they're, even though they're smooth, they're not slick. So if you have one that is really slick on the bottom, that's a good thing. That's a sign that it's probably an older pan that's been well used over its life. All right. So when you buy them new, they're going to have a grainy texture. But seasoning over time, use over time, helps that. Like I say, the difference between mine that's nearly 100 years old is just slick smooth, where this one, even though it's been used a lot of years, it's still not quite slick smooth. All right. Now, you can shop around for things. Like I said, you can order them directly from Lodge. You can get them at Walmart. You can find them at the old-fashioned style hardware stores. Wherever. I think probably Amazon even sells them. They sell everything. So anyway, you can find them. Just keep an eye out. But yard sales, especially estate sales where the young people have inherited their grandparents' stuff and they have no idea about cast iron, a lot of times you can pick those up for a fairly cheap price. Flea markets is another good place to find cast iron. So anyway, if you care for this, it will last forever, as is evidenced by my skillet that is only its whole life been used for bread. And so, it'll last forever if you take care of it. All right. So let's continue talking about Dutch ovens just a little bit and talk about just a tiny bit about history. Dutch ovens have been used in America, of course, since colonial times. But they first date back, the first iron kettles date back to the 7th and 8th centuries. And, a large cast iron pot was essential. So there's a couple of different stories about when these, what we call now camp ovens, were invented, and with the lip. And so it's a flanged lid. So one of the stories is that Napoleon was tired of the ashes falling into his food, and he ordered that the lids be altered. That's one of the stories. And the other is that the blacksmith and silversmith, none other than Paul Revere, created the flange lid, and then he also standardized the sizes. So if you get a number 8, a number 10, a number 12, a number 14, he's the one who standardized the sizes. Now, we know he standardized the sizes, but whether it was him or Napoleon that invented the flange lid, I can't tell you. But I thought it was just kind of an interesting thing. Side note, I guess. I'm just glad somebody did it, because it makes our lives a little bit easier. All right. And it is one of the most versatile things that you can have in your cast iron collection. Yes, skillets are great, but like I said, you can bake anything. You can bake bread. You can even in the deep 12-inch, you can even put a bread pan, a loaf pan, and bake a loaf of bread. I've done that many times. I've baked banana bread just in this without a pan. Just poured it in here and baked banana bread. So there's a lot of things that you can do. You can bury them in the coals, or you can do like I was talking about and just pull it out, have coals under the bottom and coals on the top. They're again, I can't say enough. They will last you forever if you just take care of them. And there's all different kind of sizes. And the first size difference that I wanted to give, well, of course, 8, 10, 12, 14, up to however big. I don't even know how big they go. I think 16 for sure. I know they go to 16 for sure. But the other one is if this is a 12-inch, both of these are 12-inch, but this one is a shallow and this one is deep. So you can see the difference in how tall they are. The top one is shallow, and for sure, if you're baking biscuits or cornbread, you for sure want to use a shallow. Now, if you're making a pot of stew, a big pot of stew or something else, or you're wanting to use a loaf pan, then you would use the deep. So, and that's why we have both, because it just, when we actually, next week when we actually cook the food on the fire and show you all of that, we'll probably use the deep because of what we're going to make, and it'll just do better if we put it in the deep pan. And our cornbread, we'll make cornbread too, and it will be baked in baby, the 12-inch regular pan. All right, so now I told you that we would talk about sizes too and capacity. There's they come as small as 5-inch. I mean, I can't imagine needing one smaller than an 8. That's pretty small. But they go from 5 to 8 to 10 to 12 and 14 and 16. So, and some of them come in deep as well as shallow, and some of them don't. So it's just what you find. And some of them only come in deep. So there's no telling what you might find, especially if you find something really old that now is not made but was a long, long time ago. So also I told you that we were going to talk about estimating temperatures, because now you can find some thermometer that might work with all of this, but this isn't rocket science. You know, it's just not. And you can, once you do it enough times, you will get used to how each of your ovens and how to do your fire so that it's where you need it to be. Okay, so there's several theories though about estimating temperatures, and all of them are just like I say, they're just starting points for you, because once you start doing it, you'll understand and know, okay, I need this many coals, this much coals. I'm not saying this many because we talked about charcoal versus wood, and we're assuming you're cooking with wood. But how many coals you need under the bottom and on the top to accomplish what it is you're cooking. So if you need it hot, real hot and boiling, you want more of both on both sides. So anyway, there's no hard and fast rules. This is just guidelines, okay? So keep that in mind as we talk about this. And you might try several different ways too. All right. Because remember, thermometers, there used to not be a such thing as a thermometer that you could put in your food or to do things like that with. So a long, long time they cooked without the need for those. So we can too. All right. So one of the ways to do it is to hold your palm over the inside of the pan. Hold your palm over and wrist, because remember, you check on your wrist for the baby's formula because that's a sensitive area. Now my hands can handle a lot of heat. My wrist cannot. So put your palm with your wrist over it and you count like you were counting like 1 1,000, 2 1,000, like you were counting seconds, okay? And so if it was a count from 6 to 8 means that your oven is about 250 to 300 degrees. A count of 4 to 5 means it ranges from 350 to 400. A count from 2 to 3 could go as high as 450. And 1 or less is 500 and up, and I don't think you need to cook anything any higher than that. So, another method is sprinkling a pinch of flour into your pan and onto the surface. And you leave it for 5 minutes. And if it's unchanged in color, the oven heat is about 250 degrees or under. Could be under if it doesn't change colors at all. If it's a pale tan, that means it's about 300 degrees. If it's golden brown, it's about 350. If it's dark brown, it's about 400. And if it's black, it'll burn whatever you put in there. So you just have to get that figured out. Okay? So like I say, it's not rocket science, it's just fun. It's a lot of fun, but it's something that I think we all need to know how to do, because you don't know. You know, we just lived through Hurricane Michael and we were without power for 16 days. We were lucky. There were a whole lot more people that were without it for a lot longer, and there are still people in the Panama City area living in tents. So you never know when, well, Danny at D South Homestead, he calls it LCEs, life-changing events. And for this area, Michael was a definite life-changing event. It doesn't have to be the end of the world as we know it or the apocalypse for your life to have a life-changing event. And Michael was that for way too many people in this area. So, knowing how to do this and not have to depend on the system is a good thing. It never hurts to know how to do this. And like I say, you don't have to have as much gear as we do. We've collected it over the years. We enjoy doing it, and we do it with, the open fire, the living histories and things like that. And so that we've collected for things like that, and we do reenactments. And so, and at times we cook for the reenactment group. And so if you were traveling with a military group, you would have more stuff than the normal person would. And so that's one of the reasons also that we do. So anyway, now I want to touch just a little bit about seasoning. We're not going to get into that very deep right now. We're going to talk about it later in the fourth video. This is the second. We'll talk about it more in depth in the fourth video. Most of the cast iron now that you buy is pre-seasoned. And so here's my thing about that. I'm not going to just put food in it without washing it, okay? Because you don't know where any of that's been. And I know people go, you don't wash it. Well, yes, you do. I mean, there's just some things you can't get around. You just have to wash. But if you take care of it, if you re-oil it and you heat it up and you do things like that, then you're going to be fine. It's going to be fine. So don't worry about whether it's a pre-seasoned piece that you're looking for or looking at, or whether it's an old piece that has a lot of good seasoning on it. So, like I said, we'll get into all of this deeper at the end of this. But either way, pre-seasoned or an old piece that has already been seasoned that might even need to be re-seasoned, we'll get into all of that at the end of this series. All right, I hope you enjoyed our visit today, and I thank you for coming along, and I thank you for being part of our journey. I hope you have a very blessed day, and be sure to like, subscribe, and share. I always forget that. I always forget share. And check us out on Pemberley and on Facebook and Instagram. Thank you from Pemberley Farm.